John Miller had lived on his farm for almost 2 years. A man of few words, lost in the solitude that the frontier had given him. He wasn't always this way. Once, he had been a part of a large, bustling family back in the East. But that had all changed when an accident had taken them from him. With no one left to turn to, he decided to pack up and head west. He believed that a fresh start might be the only way to leave behind the memories of loss that had haunted him. His farm was small but had everything he needed: cattle, a few chickens, and a small crop of corn. He had learned to survive on his own, never asking for help, rarely talking to the few neighbors who lived miles away. John didn't mind the loneliness, though. It was easier that way, easier than facing a world that had taken everything from him. That was until the night the storm came. It had started as a small rumble in the distance, a sound that he could ignore. But by late evening, the wind picked up and the rain began to pour, coming down in sheets that blurred the world outside. The sky was dark, with flashes of lightning lighting up the night, making everything look like a scene from some distant memory. John was used to the storms. They came every season, but tonight something felt different. He was inside, sitting by the fire, trying to warm up a stew he had left simmering when he heard the sound. A faint but unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. At first he thought it was just the wind or the rain playing tricks on him, but then it came again, louder this time. Someone was out there and they were close. John's heart raced, his hand instinctively moving toward the rifle hanging on the wall. He wasn't sure if it was the storm, the isolation, or something else entirely. But the thought of someone being out there in this weather didn't sit right with him. Slowly, he stepped to the door and cracked it open, keeping his rifle close. He squinted into the darkness, trying to see through the rain and the dark. The world beyond the door seemed like an endless gray blur. Then through the mist, he saw her, a young woman, her clothes drenched and clinging to her body, standing silently just a few feet from his porch. She was small, thin, with long black hair that had been whipped by the wind. She looked up at him, her face pale but determined, and without saying a word, stepped closer to the door. "Help me," she said quietly, barely audible above the storm's roar. John's mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing out here all alone in the middle of nowhere? He could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that wasn't just from the storm. Something was wrong, but he also saw something else, something that made him hesitate. For a moment he stood there, unsure of what to do. He had always kept to himself, never gotten involved with anyone, especially strangers. The frontier was a hard place and trust was a rare commodity. But then something in her eyes convinced him. Perhaps it was the exhaustion in her voice, or maybe it was the sheer hopelessness that seemed to hang around her. He opened the door wider. "Come in," he said, his voice low and steady. She stepped inside quickly, shaking the rain from her hair and wiping her face with her sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know where else to go. My village, it's gone. I had to leave before they found me." John raised an eyebrow. Her words were cryptic, and the look in her eyes only added to the mystery. The woman, seeing his confusion, continued. "My name is Lila," she said. "I'm Apache." John's heart skipped a beat. Apache? In his years out here, he had heard stories about the tensions between settlers and Native American tribes, the constant threat of raids, the violence. But he couldn't let his thoughts cloud his judgment. She was standing in front of him, alone and scared. The storm outside was just as dangerous as the people chasing her. John hesitated, but quickly made up his mind. He showed her to the fire where she sat, her hands trembling as she pulled off her wet boots and wrapped herself in an old blanket he had in the corner. "Sit by the fire and warm up. You're safe here for now," he said, trying to sound reassuring. Lila nodded, gratefully accepting his hospitality. As she settled down, John went back to his stew, trying to keep himself busy. It was awkward, the silence between them thick and heavy. Neither of them seemed to know how to start a conversation. Finally, it was Lila who broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "You're going to be the father of my children," she said suddenly, her words taking John completely by surprise. John stopped what he was doing, turning to her with a look of confusion. He hadn't expected such a statement, not in this moment, not from someone he had just met. "What?" he asked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Lila met his gaze directly. There was no hesitation in her eyes, no doubt in her voice. "You're going to be the father of my children," she repeated. "That is the way of my people. It is how we survive." John stared at her, struggling to understand. He had never heard of such a custom before. The idea of becoming a father, especially to someone he had just met under these circumstances, seemed impossible. The words were too heavy, too strange. Was this some kind of cultural misunderstanding? But Lila didn't seem to be joking. She continued, her voice calm. In my tribe, it is a bond, a protection. You take care of me and I will take care of you. Our survival depends on it. I need you, and you need me. John didn't know how to respond. Her words were so foreign, so different from the way he had lived his life. He had come to the West to escape connections, to be free from responsibilities. But this was different. For a long time they sat in silence, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. John was lost in thought, trying to make sense of everything. What did this mean? Was he really supposed to take on such a role in her life? Could he? Should he? Lila watched him carefully, waiting. There was something in her eyes that told him she wasn't going anywhere. She was here to stay for better or worse. And John, though still unsure, felt a shift within himself, a stirring he couldn't quite explain. He hadn't asked for this, but somehow, he knew his life was about to change forever. John sat in silence for what felt like hours, staring into the flickering flames. The wind howled outside, and the rain continued to beat against the windows with a constant rhythm. But inside, the fire crackled softly and the warmth filled the room, providing some comfort against the cold night. His mind was racing, but he couldn't find the words to express what he was feeling. Everything had changed in the span of a few minutes. The quiet life he had built for himself now felt uncertain, overshadowed by this stranger in his home and her strange declaration. Lila sat across from him, her eyes steady and calm as if she had already made up her mind about everything. Her gaze never wavered, but there was a sadness in her eyes that John couldn't ignore. She had been through something terrible, something that had driven her here to his doorstep, seeking safety. John had never been the kind of man to shy away from a challenge, but this was different. It wasn't just about surviving the harsh life on the frontier anymore. This was about a responsibility he wasn't sure he could handle. He had spent years alone, relying only on himself. He wasn't prepared for the weight of another person, let alone the future of a family. Yet as he looked at Lila, he felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just pity or guilt, it was something deeper, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of duty. She was alone, vulnerable, and desperate, and for some reason he couldn't ignore her. The hours passed slowly, and as the storm raged on, John found himself growing more comfortable with the silence between them. Eventually, Lila broke the stillness again. You must be wondering why I said that, she said quietly. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as though she were uncertain about his response. But where I come from, we are taught that bonds are made through need, through survival. It is not about love at first sight or grand promises. It is about sharing strength. When you protect someone, they become yours and you become theirs. Together we are stronger. John nodded slowly. He understood survival. He had learned that the hard way, but this was something entirely different. He didn't know if he could be what she needed him to be. I don't know if I'm ready for that, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I've been alone for so long. I don't know how to... He trailed off, unsure of how to finish his sentence. The words didn't seem to come out right. How could he explain that he wasn't sure he could take on the responsibility she was asking of him? Lila, however, didn't seem offended. She simply nodded as if she understood. It is not easy. But sometimes the world does not give us the time we need to prepare. We must act quickly or we will lose what we have. John looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She wasn't just a girl caught in a bad situation. She was strong, stronger than he had ever given her credit for. She had survived things that he couldn't even imagine, and yet she still had the courage to stand in front of him, asking for his help. It made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. The next few days passed slowly as the storm continued to rage outside. Lila stayed by the fire most of the time, resting and recovering from the long journey. John, too, was lost in his own thoughts, trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded in such a short time. As they spent more time together, John began to notice things about her. She had an easy way with the animals. She seemed to know exactly how to calm the horses, how to speak to them in a way that made them listen. Her hands were skilled, steady and gentle. Nothing like he had expected from someone who had been running for their life. She wasn't just a refugee. She was a survivor, someone who knew how to adapt to her environment and make the best of what she had. One evening, after a long day of working the farm together, Lila spoke again, this time with a sense of finality. I know this is hard for you, but I believe this is how we are meant to be. I have nothing left. You are my family now, and one day we will be a family together." Her words were simple, but they struck John like a thunderclap. He had always thought of family as something that came from blood, from shared history and memories. But Lila was right. Family didn't always have to come from the past. Sometimes it came from the present, from the choices you made in the moment. John's heart tightened. He had lost so much. He didn't want to lose the chance at something more, something better, even if he wasn't sure how to make it work. He wasn't sure if he was ready to step into the role Lila wanted him to take. But as he watched her sitting there by the fire, looking at him with such sincerity, he knew one thing for certain. He didn't want to turn her away. He didn't want her to be alone. The days turned into weeks, and the tension between them began to fade, replaced by an uneasy sense of understanding. John and Lila still had their moments of silence, but they were no longer filled with uncertainty. Instead, they were filled with a quiet, shared understanding of each other's presence. It was as if, without saying it aloud, they had both come to terms with the bond between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something important, something real. And that for now was enough. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, John turned to Lila. He didn't have the answers, and he wasn't sure what the future held. But he knew that he couldn't keep living in the past. He couldn't keep running from the chance to build something, to make a life again. "You're right," he said softly. This isn't what I expected, but I can't walk away from it. I won't." Lila's face softened, and for the first time since she had arrived, John saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of relief. "We will build something together, a future, a family." And in that moment, John realized that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new, something he never could have planned for, but something that was exactly what he needed, a chance to rebuild, to heal, and to find a new kind of family, in a place where he least expected it. As the sun sank lower, casting a golden glow over the land, John finally allowed himself to believe that the future, whatever it might bring, was something he was ready to face, with Lila by his side.